this is what bud break is. It's when the first leaf tip is visible. So it's actually this here, right when that first leaf edge becomes visible, not separated from the shoot tip, so not this. Oftentimes, we get these emails from marketing people at wineries, and they're like, "Bud break is happening," and they show this. And as viticulturists, as nitpicky viticulturists, we're like, "Bud break has happened." Okay, you're a little late to the game. This is actually bud break. Notice, by the way, that the pink in the buds, those are anthocyanins, by the way. So anthocyanins being, of course, the red color in grapes. And we have a lot of those in leaves as well. And they act as, we believe, as like kind of photoprotectors. Yeah, as does the fuzz. You see all that fuzz on there? That is also probably for photoprotection of the young growing tissue. Okay? So yeah, this bud break usually happens when bud temperatures get above 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So when temperatures are regularly above 50, that's about when we start to see bud break happen, which is why in the growing degree day formula, we use 50 degrees Fahrenheit as our base. Okay, so if you haven't heard of GDDs, you will, and we'll talk about that. And that's why 50 degrees is there. Yeah, before bud break, we can get frost, and that's fine. It doesn't matter if we go to 30 degrees when the buds are swelling. But once they break and once we get shoot growth, then once we get below 32, that's when we can start to get frost problems in the spring. So yeah, bud break, it's not always going to be the same, right? Of course, like wherever you are, bud break is going to happen at different times. So here in the U.S., generally the first people to break bud are going to be the San Joaquin Valley, the Central Valley of California, and then followed by, as you go north on the West Coast, Willamette Valley happens kind of mid-April. Here in the Finger Lakes, this is really one of the latest places I've ever lived that breaks bud. It's because it's so cold here for so long. Horrendous. So here in the Finger Lakes, it's a month behind my home state. So yeah, the timing is really dependent on more than just temperature, but also rootstocks, like I said. So like something like Berlandieri, which is that rootstock from Texas, rootstock species from Texas that exists on the rocky soils natively. It is very drought tolerant and line tolerant. This one breaks bud much later than something like Vitis riparia, which is the one, of course, that's on the riparian zones. Variety as well is going to have a major influence on when buds break. So again, like something like Chardonnay, Chenin Blanc, Gewürztraminer will break bud much sooner than something like Riesling. And again, this is also probably why here in the Finger Lakes, things break bud pretty late because they're growing a lot of Riesling, of course. But also it has a lot to do with the fact that it's very cold here for an inordinate amount of time. So the buds break, and then the vines use internal carbohydrate reserves and nutrient reserves to drive that early season growth. So basically using up, again, like I mentioned this in the previous lecture, the vine uses its internal reserves primarily from bud break until about flowering, and then it switches over. The slides will not be posted. So I forgot about that. I initially was posting the decks, but then I realized that what we are doing is not giving you the decks because it's then requires people to actually watch the lectures and not just Control F through the slide decks as they do the quizzes. Yeah, the vines they grow pretty quickly in the early season, so they can grow like 1 to 3 inches every week until flowering time. So that's really fast. So some key operations that'll happen during bud break and shoot growth are, of course, thinning. So we go out and we actually thin the vine. We start usually at about 3 inches of shoot growth. This is probably going to be like around when we would end shoot thinning, hopefully. So we'd start about 3 inches, and then we'd thin it down so we have nice open canopies with airflow and sunlight and so forth. That's mostly for disease management, but also for increasing some secondary metabolites. We begin spraying at about 3 to 6 inches of shoot growth. And then at about 16 unfolded leaves is about when flowering will begin. And that's when we start to get a net gain of photoassimilates. So up until flowering, we're using up our internal carbohydrate reserves, and then at about 16 leaves unfolded, then the vine is putting carbohydrates back into its permanent structures, and then flowering begins.